put a ship to sea in the age of exploration, a captain needed the help of two widely different sorts of people, the ordinary sailor and the king. Royal palaces became the centers of complete power in the 1400s. Only monarchs could give the authority for voyages of discovery or trade. After listening to requests from merchants and captains, they might even grant money to encourage exploration, realizing that in such voyages lay the chance for wealth and power from new trade and new lands. But if you look closely at historical pictures, you will see another reason for their interest in exploration. Whether it's the departure of John Cabot from England, the landing of Christopher Columbus in America, or the death of an Indian chief by Spanish conquistadors, representatives of the church stood nearby just as they were near to the thrones of Europe. The influential clergy spoke of spreading the Christian faith as a way of gaining glory in the eyes of God. And so kings and queens had a missionary interest in exploration too. Since the time of Cabot, and perhaps before, French fishermen had ventured to the shores of the New World, but only to bring back food. France was too involved in European struggles to match the claims and conquests of other nations. But when a lull came in fighting, the French king, Francis I, turned his attention to the growing prizes in exploration. In 1524, he sent Verrazano across the Atlantic, hoping to discover the Orient. Again, 10 years later, an expedition headed by Jacques Cartier excitedly enters a large river. Was this a northwest passage? Along the way, new land and strange sights. The crew is amused by seals frolicking for attention, and by walruses, which at least one short-sighted explorer thought to be mermaids. Cartier soon met Indians.
These people came to our ship with such great love and friendliness as if we had been of this country. They had come to barter with us some furs. All they had to such an extent that all went back naked.
This was the beginning of the fur trade that was to lure the French into the heart of the New World. But for the moment, the lure was new land and converts to the Christian faith.
We made a great cross 30 feet high, on which we hung up a shield with 3 fleurs-de-lis, and inscribed the cross with this motto, Vive le roi de France.
Jacques Cartier was to make 3 trips up the river soon known as the St. Lawrence. But narrowing banks and rapids prevented his passage to China, just as the biting cold winters defeated several brave efforts to settle the land. But the crushing blow was learning from his king that French interest in exploration must be short-lived. The conflicts of Europe were more important than the future of a distant wilderness. The year is 1603. Indians paddle out to meet the French who have returned at last. The leader, Samuel de Champlain, when he was a young sailor, visited the prospering Spanish colonies to the south. Now he hopes France can be as successful in the land these Indians call Canada. His king, Henry IV, aware of mounting interest in overseas colonies, yet too involved in European struggles to spend money, has been offered a cheap way to build an empire. With business booming, and with Europe's growing hunger for more goods, the king agrees to give a group of French merchants permission to trade in the New World, if at the same time they would settle and explore. Champlain, chosen by the business group and with royal assent, leaves France, heading for the land visited by Cartier years earlier. As France makes this determined effort, other exploring nations of Europe have similar plans. The century of failure to find a passage through this new world to the known riches of Asia calls for a new approach. Perhaps a permanent base would make the search easier. Even though several colonies had failed in the previous century, England, Holland, and France, as the 1600s began, were eager to start empires of their own. Spain, the sole colonizing power during the previous century, had threatened and attacked any intruders until the disastrous defeat of the Armada puts an end to Spain's mastery of the ocean. This gives other nations confidence to try their luck on new shores. Because settlement was needed to prove and protect claims, France was anxious to have Champlain build on the discovery of Cartier. France's first permanent base is at Quebec. This is Champlain's own drawing of the first dwelling. But what a dreadful first winter.
The scurvy lasted until the middle of April. 18 was struck down. Of these, 10 died, and 5 others died of dysentery. Sometime after our surgeon died. Of our company, now only 8 of the 28 remained, and half of these were ailing
Help arrived from France just in time. The colony at Quebec was to survive and remain to this day the capital of French Canada. Champlain the colonizer was also an explorer, still looking for the passage to the Orient. The Indians had many times spoken of the great waters to the west and agreed to lead him to it. There were long weeks ahead of paddling and carrying canoes. At last, from a hilltop, a guide pointed to a great body of water. They were soon by its shore, but this tasted not like the salt water of an ocean, the ocean that led Magellan and Drake to China. It was, in fact, one of the Great Lakes. Disappointed, Champlain returned to Quebec to watch over, until he died, the colony he had founded. Today, Champlain is remembered as the father of New France. After Champlain came a new breed of men. They lived and traveled with the Indians. These adventurers were coureurs de bois, runners of the forest. Rather than settlers and farmers, they were traders with no interest in developing the land. These French tackled a beautiful but difficult land. Their motive was the fur trade, as important to them as the hope for gold or Christian converts or the route to Asia was to other explorers. Down rushing rivers, fighting dangerous rapids, crossing lake after lake, and tracking miles through forests, they ransacked the country for furs, a prize of great value in the European market. As furs became scarcer, the traders went deeper into the country. Competition, too, made furs harder to get. English settlers arriving along the Atlantic coast, and an English trading company that soon tapped the land around Hudson's Bay, plus the arrival of the Dutch at New Amsterdam, all were soon moving inland after the same prize. The stage was set for a struggle, for both the furs and the land that offered them. Another group from France was also looking for Indians, not for trade, but with a higher motive, to spread the word of God. These missionaries, as brave as traders, had to be mapmakers and explorers as well. Missions were established alongside trading posts from the St. Lawrence right into the interior. Meanwhile, French colonists, few in number, remained clustered in a narrow belt along the St. Lawrence. It was only a short time before what the Indians spoke of as the Father of Waters was discovered by a missionary, Father Marquette, and a fur trapper, Louis Joliet, traveling together.
We safely entered the Mississippi on the 17th of June with a joy that I cannot express.
The man who would follow the Mississippi to its end was also a Frenchman, René Robert de La Salle, a gentleman from a wealthy family who felt the life for him was in the wilds of New France. But La Salle was more than a trader. His dreams were those of an empire builder who saw the need for forts and for colonists. Hearing of the Mississippi, La Salle set out hoping that a new French route might hem in the English on the Atlantic seaboard. Frequently, they had to wade through marshes waist deep with canoes and provisions on their backs. But La Salle would have his empire.
After a salute of firearms and cries of Vive la Roi, Monsieur de La Salle, in the name of His Majesty, took possession of that river, of all the rivers that enter it, and of all the country watered by them.
To New France was added the area of Louisiana, extending French claims over half a continent. But could roaming fur traders and a few outposts linked by weeks of travel to a small distant colony control this vast area? New Spain might reach further north. The English, 20 times more numerous than the French, were pushing inland from the Atlantic, more intent on establishing new homes. English traders were also laying claims to the fur-rich lands around Hudson's Bay. While only dimly aware of the sweeping size and potential riches of the New World, England and France, at war in Europe, extended their rivalry over this land free for the taking, land that would give profit and power for European conflicts. But to the colonist, the land on which he worked provided his daily bread and his hope for the future of his family. Exploration, followed by settlement, would make the prize of this broad land even greater. But who would win this growing struggle for possession?